Well, good afternoon if you are in New York City or Baltimore or Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Good evening if you are in Dresden. Hello and special love to our loved ones in Ukraine. We think of you, we are with you, we support you, we send you music, we send you hope. And greetings to people all around the world, including a listener in Nepal I know is listening in. I'm Fred Plotkin. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. I love having guests who I love. How does that sound? And I love Tichina Vaughn, wonderful American mezzo-soprano who has been resident in Europe, mostly Dresden in recent years, for many, many years. Welcome, my dear.
Thank you. So honored to be here.
Thank you.
I have been listening to some of the previous guests, and I have to say, I feel like I'm in the Hall of Fame, really.
You are indeed. I first became aware of you. Most American artists who I've become aware of, typically it has been through the Metropolitan Opera National Council, now called, which leads to the Lindemann Young Artist Program. And unfortunately, I forget the new name of the program. I promised to learn it. I think it's La Fonte. I will learn it. But I had already known of you by then, by the time you appeared in the Met Finals, because Marilyn Horn was an old friend of mine and someone I've had the honor to work with a lot. Always, she and I like to speak at 2 or 3 in the morning. We're both night owls. And she would often call me or I would call her. We would email about 2 or 3 and just talk for an hour. And she would always say to me, there's someone I want you to watch. There's someone you need to listen to. And one of the people she alerted me to was Tichina Vaughn, a mezzo-soprano from North Carolina. So I began to follow you even before then.
I never knew that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So I was aware. I mean, there are other artists who are of your vintage, but also much more recent who, I mean, I remember she said to me once, there's this girl named Nadine Sierra. People don't know her yet, but you need to know her. And actually, Marilyn and I worked with Nadine when Nadine was 20, even before she won the Met National Council and so forth.
Wow.
So Marilyn is a fantastic scout of talent, not surprisingly.
Very much so, very much
and so I was aware of you early. Now, in looking up your basic bio, I know that you were born in Baltimore. I didn't realize that. I thought you were born in North Carolina, but I was mistaken. How long did you live in Baltimore?
Not very long. It was my mother happened to birth me in Baltimore due to an old church tradition, let's say it like that. But that very soon after, let's say it must have been months because I have no recollection of Baltimore. So I am a North Carolinian,
Would you want to share what that old church tradition is? I would love to know if it's something you talk about.
Well, we didn't very much, but perhaps it is something, it was this thing of, it was an unwed, today, we're fighting now Roe versus Wade, which is all the way, my mother would have been delighted if people would have fought for such a right. Just in the sense of your reproductive rights, what your ability to do. But in those days, there was no such thing. And so it was a situation where you were going to birth the child, whether or not, but you didn't have the opportunity to do it. In the city, it was better for some reason. I still don't understand it, to be honest, where you were not resident. So she was sent to relatives that could care for her during her period of pregnancy and birth. And soon thereafter, once I was healthy and delivered, we were on our way back home. So all of my recollections are of being a North Carolinian bred, so to speak.
Well, there is a correlate in Europe that women who were pregnant, who were from areas that were part of the Habsburg, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, often went to Vienna to deliver their babies, in part because there was excellent medical care in Vienna, as there is in Baltimore, but also because it made them automatically citizens of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they could say on their birth certificate that they were Viennese.
Well,
And
we don't know. I mean, I'm let me say it like this. I'm grateful for the life that I have, and it has been a very graced and very blessed life. I and the great grandmother who apparently made such decisions when they were necessary, I honor with all of my heart and soul. The mother who raised me and who, sent me to performing arts school when it was necessary and set me on this path, I honor with all of my heart and soul. I don't know. I can't judge. I can't in any way adjudicate the decisions that were made, before my birth, during my childhood, whatever, but I'm grateful for all
I
of
can
them.
only say that you share that with Billie Holiday and the great baseball player Babe Ruth. They
There
too
you
were
go.
born in Baltimore, but went elsewhere.
There you go. Who is one of my heroes
Babe Ruth?
No, obviously, obviously, Billie Holiday.
So let's talk about North Carolina. Am I correct? You grew up in Winston-Salem?
I did.
Okay.
I grew up, I was schooled and did most of my early life in Winston-Salem. However, my mother was a very intelligent, very smart woman. And so after the thing was that she was enrolled when I was born at Bennett College in Greensboro, which is which is, if you can say an equivalent, the Spelman of North Carolina. Spelman is an all-women's college in Atlanta, which is famous for the illustrious graduates, which have gone on to be world changers. And my mother was at the time at Bennett. And so because my birth was sort of an interrupter to that, she decided that when she got home and I was born and everything was good, because she had such great family support, she enrolled at Wake Forest, which, was equivalent to she was also part of the protest in Greensboro, North Carolina with Dr. King but in every case, her educational pursuits were at that point interrupted. But she became eventually worked for an airline. So I grew up in Winston-Salem until sort of middle school, where she then we moved to Washington, D.C., where she worked at the airport there for maybe 2 years or so. And then Hartsville in Atlanta expanded, or whatever the case was. And we moved to Atlanta. So about my 8th grade year or so, we moved to Atlanta and I was in school there. And there is where, I guess around 10th grade, 9th, 10th grade, she put me in the high school for performing arts in Atlanta.
Got it. So you've already raised a lot of things that I wanted to address in one way or another. One is, I have a branch of my family in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And it's really the only part of North Carolina that I know at all well. I've been elsewhere, but I have lots of family in Winston-Salem.
How shocking is
they
that?
kind of say Win-Salem. And my late aunt was very involved in the arts, and she was a professor before, and they retired to Winston-Salem, but they retired there because other relatives moved there, and there was a family nucleus and now a family burial ground in Winston-Salem.
Wait, the name?
Blickman, Blickman, and Kahn, Kon. And Neil Kahn, who is still with us, thank goodness, is a major professor and surgeon at Wake Forest University Hospital, where he teaches cardiology.
How crazy is that?
And may you never need him, but he's great. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Of course, a lot of my, I have my sister-in-law she must be the chief of nursing by now.
Mhm.
But when I was met my ex-husband and growing up there, she worked at this institution. So yeah, and of course,
So,
Wake Forest
yeah,
is famous for us for Maya Angelou.
also
Yeah,
Professor Dr. Maya Angelou, a poet and actress and singer and chef and all kinds of things. Um, I want to specifically talk about Winston-Salem as an arts community because it's something people don't know. They tend to make associations with major metropolitan areas, obviously, for the arts, and maybe places like Austin, Texas, which is now a major metropolitan area for music. But Winston-Salem, for its size, is one of the most arts-oriented cities of the United States. And
yeah,
people either know that or they don't.
I
And part of
agree.
why my aunt was interested in moving there specifically was that.
Yeah,
And there is something called the North Carolina School of the Arts, which outside of the sort of Northeastern chain of great conservatories, plus Midwestern Big Ten universities such as Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin, and Ohio State and others, that's really the place.
yeah, yeah,
And
I
so when
agree.
you were a girl, because I now know your trajectory in terms of geography, did you have your eyes on North Carolina School of the Arts, and was it your
It's a
focus?
crazy story. It's a crazy, people tell me often I should write a book, but I give a lot of credit. I'm a great believer in God and the power of, in this sense of godly predestination and whatever. And it's funny. The real deal is that all the years that I lived in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem, I had no idea there was a school of the arts or university for the arts in this town. I wasn't, I guess, in this trajectory, in this type of, I wasn't seeking such a thing. But what happened was once we moved to Atlanta, my mother and I, we were, she was a single mother, as I said, and it was just she and I often. And I said, my cousins who had just recently had in Boston a great time. Oh, no, in Cincinnati they came, my whole family to see the idea, and she never ceases to remind us that I sang. She had to babysit me, and I sang all the time, even when we were kids. But in the sense that, oh my God, it got on her nerves. If this baby would stop this melody, it would be fine. So my mother, God rest her soul, I lost her in 2021, but she recognized that, and I believe it was a situation that she had a colleague at. Was it U.S. Air, I think, at the time? Because, it was Piedmont when she started. I think it was USA and then it became American. But in every case, she had a colleague there who also had a talented son around my age, who was in a summer program at the high school for performing arts in Atlanta. And we actually lived outside of the Atlanta city limits. So there was a whole bunch to go through to get me there. But she managed to sign me up. I think after we had been there my first summer, second summer it must have been, she signed me up for a summer program, which was equivalent to, summer school, but performing arts summer school, which who knew? I had no idea. I was, a girl who sang in the choir from North Carolina, won a few talent shows, whatever. But yeah, my mom had the ear, and she got me in, and I was some, chorus member, ensemble person, really, to be honest, chubby, girl with a nice sound who couldn't really dance. But the thing was, we had like 2 hours of dance first thing, and then an hour of acting, and then whatever show that we were going to present, at the end of the summer rehearsal. So it was like I was home. It was amazing. It was like, oh my God, yes, I'm right in step. I am chubby. I don't have this limberness of things, but I'm going to do this kickball chain, and And it even ended up, I'll never forget that this summer that I thought, oh my God, all those dancer girls, they're so beautiful, whatever. But there came a moment in like dance class, let's say 3 weeks in, where he said to everybody, watch her. Now, she may not have the, form and everything, but she's giving everything,
And you're musical.
know.
That's the other thing.
Anyway, and
People
so I
who
was
move musically are different from people who dance
I was not a dancer.
graphically.
Nobody was gonna, buy my grand jeté or whatever, but there was something I could do on stage that I could sell, and they told me people would buy it.
Yep.
And that was the beginning. And at the end of that summer, school workshop, whatever, the instructor, who I credit to this very day for all of it, said to my mom, you need to, because in the end, it was also a magnet, I don't know if you know the term, a magnet high school. So if you were
Define it for our listeners. I know it, but define it for our listeners.
So if you were gifted in any way, it could be scientific, linguistically, artistically, athletically, whatever, there was the possibility for you to apply and be taken into this magnet high school system back in the late 80s, early 90s. Let's say, I don't know if it was before that, but that was my time. In every case, he explained it to my mom that he thought I was a candidate for that, and she signed me up, and it ended up, in those days, you can't imagine, it was so, I didn't even really live in the Atlanta city limits. They used to give us what you call now tokens for the MARTA, what is it, Atlanta Mass Transit
Is
System.
Is it MAPTA, Metropolitan Area?
Metropolitan Atlanta.
Right.
Whatever transportation system. And we would get like every week, like these 2 bags of tokens. And I had to take 2 sets of subways and then a bus through this neighborhood, which was so funny because I was raised with a great grandmother that watched the soap operas. You know what that means. And at that time, Erica Kane, if that says anything to you.
All My Children.
Yeah, was a huge, and you would always see these pictures of what a house looked like with this circular driveway and these things. And technically speaking, I would get off the bus with these tokens, have to walk through this Atlanta neighborhood where these houses were like, and so that's how it all.
Let me ask you a question, which I did not think to ask you before because I didn't know about your Atlanta chapter. Were you in Atlanta in 1986?
I think I came in 87.
I see. The reason I was asking was the Metropolitan Opera, where I worked in the 1980s, did its last national tour in 1986.
Okay.
And although my job was to not be on tour, while the opera company was on tour, I was responsible for the opera house and visiting companies, whether they were dance or opera companies such as Finnish National Opera, English National Opera. That was my job. But I realized that when the Met announced its last tour would be 1986, typically it was an 8-week tour with 8 or 10 different cities, that I had to experience the Met tour. So I asked that my replacement look after the Met in New York for a week, and that I would go to Atlanta, a city I'd not yet been to, because I was told that the Met tour in Atlanta was the ultimate experience on the tour.
I can't imagine.
Atlanta was so welcoming.
Was it? Which
this
theater?
Was May or June of 1986.
Yeah, which theater did they play?
Theater. Oh, I don't know. A big Fox, a big, beautiful theater.
The Fox, yes.
Yeah, big, beautiful, historic theater. But I remember the hospitality of the city.
Yes.
Was genuine. I remember that everything was named Peachtree, and I got completely lost.
Amazing, right?
But I also remember vividly, because I'd never been to Atlanta before, I took a day and went to the Martin Luther King Historical District. Yeah. And I just entirely immersed myself in, I knew of his history, I revered him, but to be in the places that birthed him in a way.
It's
And
something, right?
it's really remarkable. And I ate in a restaurant called Pascal's,
Pascal.
which was a fantastic soul food restaurant. And
Yeah.
now when I fly and I connect in Atlanta, in Terminal B is a branch of Pascal's. And while everybody
I
else
had
goes
it as
for fast
well.
food, I know everyone else goes for fast food. I'm going to tell you a story. It was wonderful.
Let me tell you, I say often, I know there is a God because that was such an amazing, crucial, necessary, consequential, and even in these years, fruitful and foundational part of who I am, not only as an artist, but as a person.
Do you mean Pascal's or the Martin Luther King?
I'm in Atlanta. You know what's hilarious? I gotta tell you this, and then I'm sure you're gonna want to move on. Even more consequential, which I guess was a lesson for me. So, as you well know, in the past times, I'm now here in Germany, in Dresden at my home, but I was in Cincinnati, Boston, a lot of places. So in Cincinnati, not only did I have the great honor and pleasure of bringing Amneris, which is a role I began there in the States, but didn't have a chance to bring back since I became, an adult artist or whatever. But I also had this great pleasure to be part of this one-of-a-kind concert, with Morris and
I
friends.
know about that, and I want to get to it in a bit, but I want to stick to my. Okay, I know all about that, and I do want to get to it, but eventually.
It just had a connection with the school.
I do want to tell you about Pascal's because it speaks about Atlanta. That's why, and given that I now know that you were raised in part in Atlanta and formed in Atlanta, I think it's a telling story. About 7 years ago, I had to work in Sarasota, Florida, and at the opera, and connected through Atlanta and went to Pascal's. And I'm friendly, as you know, so I was friendly to the people serving me, and I ordered chicken and I ordered different vegetables. And then I said, and I'd like to take home some sweet potatoes and various things to my mother in New York. And she packed it up. She gave it to me. She put in extra things and she wrote, "For your mama."
That's how we do it.
And then in 2019, in May, I was working in South Carolina. I was doing research about the underpinnings of Porgy and Bess. And I went to South Carolina and connected through Atlanta, went back to Pascal's, and I got fish that time and was chatting with the woman, not remembering it was the same woman. And when I was about to go, she said, "Ain't you gonna buy some sweet potatoes for your mama?"
That's how we do it. I'm telling you.
And so I remembered, and she said, "You are such a friendly man, and it's so nice to deal with you." And I remember nice people, and then that says so much about the Atlanta experience.
You left your mark. You left your mark.
Yeah.
And that's how.
So
that's
she
one of
then
the
packed
things
it up,
I
and she
love
gave this
about the
beautiful
South
package
as
for my
well.
mother.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
did you get some for her?
Absolutely. I haven't been back since, but I mean, I will. Next time I have to fly somewhere to the south, unless I get a direct flight, I will change in Atlanta just to go to Pascal's.
Just to go to Pascal's. It's true.
But anyway, I want to get back to Winston-Salem. There's a reason. Winston and Salem are the names of cigarette brands, and the North Carolina tobacco industry was centered around there. And we all know of the consequences of cigarette in terms of cancer and heart disease and all that. And it was the Reynolds family who owned a lot of these cigarette companies. And I had a relative die of lung and throat cancer because he was a North Carolinian and everyone smoked. And the Reynolds family paid for hospices, but they also funded the arts a lot. It was either called Reynolda Drive or Reynolda Village, which was relating to the Reynolds. And although I'm no advocate of tobacco, it did have the consequence of really funding the arts in that city, a medium-sized city, in a way that other cities in North Carolina that are bigger, Raleigh, Charlotte, didn't quite have, although they have it, but not at that depth. And so when you were going to school there, what was that experience like, being in a place, a medium-sized city that has such a deep rooted feeling for the arts, and not just appreciation, but love and connoisseurship? It's very strong there.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. First of all, you are so right, and it's very difficult to explain to, first of all, people who don't, who've never smoked or who don't understand the tobacco industry, that when you grow up in a town, Winston, I mean, to be honest, I myself am also a former smoker, just because everyone in my family did.
Mhm.
And most people in the neighborhood either worked for Hanes, which made underwear and, which had their factories in textile, or Reynolds. My mother as well, before she started with the airline, she worked for what was then called RJR Nabisco.
Mhm.
Because they eventually bought Nabisco and started with, like, the Jello and the family products. There was a time when Bill Cosby was selling Jello, he was actually working for RJR Nabisco. People don't know that, but my mom worked in those industries then until she went there. So that's the first thing. Yeah, it's completely something. But the wonderful part of the Winston-Salem is the Salem part, in the sense that we still have Old Salem, which is the throwback to how Winston-Salem got its name. It was, there was the city of Winston, and then there was the city of Salem, which was founded by the Moravians.
Yes.
And yeah, and so we
As
still
in
have.
cookies, but also Moravian slaw, which is a Carolina specialty with catfish.
I think the way that you say that lets me know you've never been to a Moravian love feast, which is all about the biscuits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Biscuits, yes.
It's all about the love bread, which
Yeah.
they call biscuits. I'm telling you, change your life, people. Go to a love feast. You not only it'll help you sober, but it'll change your life.
Define more, because I think a lot of people, especially outside the United States, don't understand that this nation is made of all kinds of communities that have their roots elsewhere. And then what's fascinating in America is that you could have people from the Czech Republic interacting with people whose roots are in Africa. And it produces something new that's neither the Czech Republic nor Ghana.
It's true. So Winston-Salem is one of those towns, because the Salem part, as I said, was founded by the Moravians, which wandered out of Germany, actually. And is it Zinzendorf? I think Count Zinzendorf protected them with their religion, and eventually they, religious persecution, they were forced to flee. And somehow some of them ended up in Salem, North Carolina, and they founded this brotherhood, which was amazing. And they actually, even in Old Salem, which is the, part of the town of Winston-Salem that is preserved as a museum to the Moravians and their history, there is an African-American church. Because they allowed, although they did not necessarily mix, they didn't allow, but they somehow equated being African-American with also being human and being a person. And so there's an African-American graveyard and one of the oldest African-American churches on the grounds of Old Salem in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So it was the incorporation of these two towns that steeped me and made me who I am.
So now that we know from these roots, as Aretha Franklin used to say, you early on distinguished yourself vocally, and you were in the Metropolitan Opera National Finals. And then, as happens with many young artists, you went into what is now called the Lindemann Young Artist Program at the Met, and you played roles such as Anina in La Traviata, who is the last person faithful to Violetta, Lily, a wonderful small role in Porgy and Bess, and Giovanna, who is the somewhat complacent maid to Gilda and Rigoletto. So roles that one does at the start of one's career. But then rather abruptly, you left the United States. I would say abruptly because it was a great career move for you. And you became a principal artist in Stuttgart. And there have been numerous artists I've known and worked with through the years, Americans, who moved, and also Asians, who moved to Europe and especially Germany to become resident singers in certain opera houses. And they're attached to the opera houses and they do all kinds of roles. And they get a remarkable on-the-job training that I won't say can only happen in Germany, but the way it happens in Germany is much more evolved and fascinating than I think it is in most other places. So you went from playing Lily and Anina to Mistress Quickly and all kinds of major roles in Stuttgart. And you were there for a good long time, and you were named a Kammersängerin, which is a great honor. So you are KS Tichina Vaughn. And KS does not happen that easily. And typically it happens later. Piotr Bachava, the great Polish tenor, only recently became a KS. You were a KS well, and your contemporaries, but you were a KS way ahead of him. And you did Herodias, and you did Fricka in the Ring, and you did Valtrauta, and you did Erda, which is a lower register than Fricka and Valtrauta, and Giulietta in Hoffmann, and Venus and Tannhäuser, and the widow Begbik in Mahagoni, which is a wonderful role, and Eboli and Azucena. And my first Begbik, and I got to work with her, was Astrid Varnay, which makes me sound ancient, but she did it as a very old woman.
You just spoke the name of one of my goddesses.
I know, you and Christine Gerke. When I say Astrid Varnay, Christine Gerke says, now that's the one.
That's the one.
Tell me what's special
all
about
of
Astrid
it.
Varnay.
All of it. Yeah.
Talk about Astrid Varnay then, as an artist who began as a Wagnerian.
I want to say that it just so happened, that whenever I'm given assigned a role, I actually, in a certain sense, search for the oldest recording with the greatest conductor name of old that I know. And it just happened that when I got my first Clytemnestra, I stumbled upon her after, and then, I mean, it was so amazing what she did. First of all, and it's not like I listen to these people and then try to copy them. I listen to whoever I think will give me the best concept of what to look for as an artist and what I'm able to deliver. But it was mesmerizing. And then I discovered that not only was she had been a Salome, she was this amazing, plethora of
a phenomenal Brunhilde.
Just astounding, that and it was just because she was so amazing in this Clytemnestra that I saw. I thought, what else did this lady do? Which is for me always fascinating, to find an artist that was not pigeonholed, that didn't do just that, but you could look across the board, because I think that's very important, that an artist has a whole broad palette to develop from,
Well, I'm just going to interject something. I had the honor for many, many years of working with Jessie Norman on many different things.
Don't get me started.
She would, if someone would say, why don't you sing this, or shouldn't you sing that, or I don't think you should sing this, she would arch her back, rise up as tall as she could get, and she was tall, and look to the side and give the famous side eye and say, let's say it was me, Mr. Plotkin, don't you know that pigeonholes are for pigeons?
Love it. One of my greatest inspirations, as I shared with you, really, in in not only vocally, but also in that way.
Yeah, professionally.
Yeah.
So, okay. So in thinking about my conversation I was going to have with you, I came up with a visual image last night. As I told you, I stay up late, I think well at night and so on. And the image was, hello.
Oh, yeah, I had a little
Okay.
malfunction there.
The
Yeah.
image was, you know how when you throw a stone in a lake and it creates all kinds of expanding rings and that come out from where the stone impacted. So I'm calling the stone the initial roles that you did. Maybe it was a performing arts high school in Atlanta, but I was going to say the roles you did at the Met, the small roles that were your beginnings. But your career has expanded in ways that you don't necessarily, frankly, see with many artists of any voice category. Maybe a bit with baritone, certainly not with tenors, somewhat with basses, but there are fewer bass roles that are major roles. But in your case, in reviewing your career, and I've had the pleasure of hearing you in Europe, in the United States, you have continued to add many wonderful roles, deepen many other roles, return to roles that you did in different contexts with different productions in different places. And what struck me was that the career that I see, with one exception, it's most being similar to his Crystal Ludwig. In the Crystal Ludwig was the mezzo-soprano who you could say began in Berlin, and then, you know, the rings expanded and expanded. And she did Verdi, she did Wagner, of course, and Strauss, and she did all kinds of things. But one thing she did that I don't see in your resume, and maybe it's there, but I don't know it, is Mozart.
Yeah, I did
Did you
start
do
there.
any Mozart?
Of course. You know, I recognize, I say in hindsight, but I think I always knew. I had the very great fortune to land as a really ignorant of classical world in the hands of really good teachers. And not only teachers, but educators, you know, not only to what it is you need to do vocally, with your breath, whatever, but also to the world of classical music, because I had no exposure prior to, for example, leaving the High School for Performing Arts and going to Georgia State. The only exposure I had to anything classical was when I was being vetted. You know how, I don't know what you call it when you're a student, but I'd applied. I'd done the audition. They were interested in me. It was about like if I was getting a scholarship package. So they invited me to tour the university and see a performance and things like that. And that was the first time I ever saw an opera, which was The Medium, you know.
Menotti, yeah.
Yeah, by Menotti. And fortunately, I suppose, because it was in English and it was musical theater, and I had been a musical theater major now for 3 years in high school, it took me right away in, you know. But when I had no kind of connection to this world. And when I started there, so I accepted the full scholarship at Georgia State. And I was, you know, blessed to get the best teacher, who was this very famous mezzo-soprano at the time, who had done a lot of concert and oratorio work, and especially with the Robert Shaw chorale, by the name of Florence Copleff.
Oh,
Who
sure.
now,
And I'm
yeah,
just going to say for listeners, Robert Shaw is a very famous chorus master conductor based in Atlanta, making the Atlanta Symphony Chorus one of the greatest in the world.
exactly. And she did a lot of recordings you can look up, and now, as a matter of fact, the recital hall at Georgia State, which I haven't been to, but I've been notified that it is named the Florence Copleff Recital Hall at Georgia State University. But the problem for me, the issue was not with obviously with Mrs. Copleff at all. I was so ignorant, you know, I was just so, I had no idea what she meant with these things, because to go to performing arts high school, you just had to sing well. and they taught you notes, but you didn't have to necessarily read music or these type of things. And so I didn't have those skills. So yeah, it was a little bit above me. And really, the thing that drew me into it was, which is why I sent you the list, that one of the things on the list that I sent you was being assigned a Brahms song and having to go to the the library where you had to really sift through, there were real cards, not like digital, putting real
Yeah.
cards. Yeah. And I found one that was just like Jesse Norman, Brahms, whatever, and when you had to get the album, you had to go to the thing, get the album, bring it back,
An
and sit with
LP,
the,
a black
right,
vinyl disc. Yeah.
and sit with the big headphones in here. But when I pulled it out, it was a huge, beautiful African American woman who, like me at the time, we both had, black hair, and she wore a bun, and I did too. And I thought, she looks like me. It was just my first encounter.
And she was from Georgia.
And I was in Atlanta, and she was in Augusta. That's what the thing said. She was in Augusta, and I thought, it just, I don't know, opened a whole new concept of what this could be,
Just to remind listeners, I always ask my guests to send a list from the Adagio catalog of music and or performers who have inspired my guest. And I'm just going to name the artists: Jesse Norman, Janet Baker, Krista Ludwig, Marilyn Horne, Fedora Barbieri, and Shirley Verret. And 5 of them certainly are mezzo-sopranos. Jesse Norman will not fit in a pigeonhole, so
I don't know.
You say whatever she wants
about what you say about Verret.
Well, Verret too, you're right. Shirley Verret began as a mezzo. One of my personal heroines, by the way.
Me too.
I don't talk too much about favorites and so on, but if I really had to be drawn out on that, Shirley Verret is one of them. Really? And for all kind, artistically, but also as a person, she was extraordinary. I had thrilled working with her, first at La Scala and then at the Met. And I mean, so thrilling. She was described by many people as the Black Callas, which I felt was unfair to Maria Callas and to Shirley Verret. Because yes, she was Black, and yes, she was gorgeous, and yes, she was an amazing singer, and all these things. But I think they were trying to market Shirley Verret for her beauty, her temperament in a good way, her gifts and so on. But no, she was the first and only Shirley Verret.
It's true. It's true.
And she could sing Isolde, she could sing Carmen. She was a phenomenal Emily.
Astounding.
She was Didon in Les Troyennes when I worked with her.
Yeah.
And she was still the best Lady Macbeth I've ever seen in Verdi's.
Well, I was graced as a young artist there at the Met to see her last Dalai Laws with Delina. Those were some of my early years, which is difficult. I mean, this is a thing for me. It's funny. I was recently on a job where, I feel a little bit like that gap year generation, this in between, I actually probably, some people that I was working with were younger artists than me. So they have a different group. And it's interesting. They were speaking about an artist who's an older artist than me. And the concept was something like, he's of that group, not our group, but that group. And I'm sort of this middle group who, actually really
someone else in your middle group is Denise Graves. Yeah. And I've had her on this program, and I've had many people, including recently Angel Blue, talk to me about Denise Graves as being just enough older than Angel Blue that she represented the beacon rather than much older artists like Jesse Norman and Shirley Verret and Grace Bunbury and Leontine Price, Martina Roy. And I'm not only naming Black artists, obviously, but because Angel is a Black woman was looking to older Black models of excellence. That's why I'm naming Black people. But, your list has Krista Ludwig, Marilyn Horne, Fedora Barbieri, who is a thing unto herself. Talk about Fedora Barbieri.
Well,
people don't know that.
I have to go back to say that, Denise and I are together. in our upbringing. We actually were I left the School of the Arts in North Carolina with my degree, my bachelor's degree, and packed up my car and drove to Wolf Trap, which was my first, apprentice sort of thing. And it
I would
was
just define Wolf Trap being outside of Washington, D.C. at a summer festival.
a summer festival and young and very, noted young artist program, which, to be honest, I had no idea. I had applied to it because I wasn't sure that I was really ready. And it said it was the Barnes of Wolf Trap. So I thought, well, it must be some small, sort of out of the way thing that people don't know about. Ended up, I went, auditioned, I got in. And there were all my going to the met young artist program colleagues in this thing. And it was I got cast in Dido and Aeneas as the second witch, and the sorceress was Denise Graves.
Wow.
And it was an amazing cast when I look back on it. So there was a soprano by the name of Carolyn James, who I pretty much idolized for, all of the time after, who was the Dido. There was Monty Caston was Aeneas. Michael Forrest was the sailor. Heidi Grant at that time, but now Grant Murphy was Belinda. Denise Graves was the sorceress. I was the second witch. And I don't want to say, I'm not sure, there's a confusion about Audrey Luna was the name of the first witch.
Coloratura soprano.
Right. So I ended up in this cast that I had no idea of what I was dealing with, to be honest. And half of were already in the Met program where I was going in September. So Denise and I share of her, and we subsequently also, became friends. And as a matter of fact, her first husband was in the orchestra there by our Dido in the end. So we share a lot of memories and a lot of life together.
Yeah.
So we're
there. Can I go back to a question I raised, because I don't think we quite covered it? Almost every artist in every voice category, but certainly mezzos, tend to be pushed right into Mozart at the start of their careers.
Yeah.
And you've sung everything from Monteverdi to contemporary composers, but am I missing that I didn't see much Mozart?
Well, I did start out, my very first voice teacher, who I give really all the credit for, actually, the guy who ran the Performing Arts High School, I give the credit for hearing that I had an operatic voice. He actually told me and coordinated that I got a scholarship to study. But for Miss Copcliffe and I couldn't really grasp it, because she was so beyond me in a certain way. I had no theory, I had no, whatever. So I credit my understanding of how to become a singer to the teacher that I had when I finally did transfer again to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, who was Fritz Moses. Frederick Moses was his name. He's now no longer with us. But he was really instrumental in making me, because you can imagine, having been in high school already, I had a voice. I had a voice that I could sing Gladys Knight, I could sing Patti LaBelle, I could sing Nancy Wilson, and people would go, oh my goodness, So then, and then I got into the school, I could sing Broadway, I could sing Pippin, I could sing all these things. So understanding then, when I got into university, what I had to learn to become the type of singer I needed to be, first of all, needed to be explained. And it was just, whatever, the path that God set me on, his will, that when I got to North Carolina School of the Arts and I met Fritz Moses, he was able to break that down for me in a way that was totally clear, and able to then replicate and begin to understand. And so that's how.
But he didn't have you sing Mozart?
Yes. So my very first role, to answer the question, that Fritz Moses assigned to me was Dorabella.
Okay. That's a lovely role.
My very first operatic role was because the North Carolina School of the Arts the University of North Carolina School of the Arts has the very distinction of being a school that represents all of the arts. So when they get ready to do a production, your costumes are made by the School of Design and Production, as well as the set, as well as the lighting. There's a student that is doing the lighting, you know what I mean? There's the assistant stage director is also studying stage directing. We're singers studying singing. There's, you know, whatever. Sometimes the professors also participate, even, you know, to give you more. So in this sense, yeah, he had a very good ear and he knew what was going on. And my very first role that I ever sang was Dorabella in this amazing production.
I asked because, as I said, your career, in many ways, your career trajectory mirrors, to me at least, Crystal Ludwig, which is a fantastic thing to say, I think. But except for that, because she was a lot of Cherubino and Octavians and things like that, which is not Mozart, but quasi. And Sesto and La Clemenza di Tito. But you, when you went to Stuttgart and became a principal artist at a very young age, let's not hide that, were already doing what my beloved Martina Rowe calls big girl roles. In other words, no Inas for you. You were Eboli, you were Azucena, you were Venus and Tano.
No, that's not quite true.
No?
When I came to Stuttgart,
well, you were Quickly first, Mistress Quickly.
I had done Amneris in the States, in Seattle, in Orange County, in Detroit, Tulsa. I had done quite a slew of Amnerises. And the only Eboli I had done was the French version in Seattle as well, because Spade Jenkins ended up being a huge fan and you know, promoter. But the next Verdi that I had was actually the Falstaff in Stuttgart, and then subsequently Pamela Rosenberg, who I also, you know, give a lot of, as much credit as I give my high school you know, director for, you know, giving me a lot of help in finding.
So just so I understand, was Pamela Rosenberg in Stuttgart when you were there?
She was the intendantin. She was the
okay. So let's explain her. Pamela is an American, I believe, from California.
Yes.
Who has headed opera companies in Germany for much of her career, and was for a while the head of San Francisco Opera, but then returned to Europe. I've known her and worked with her, but I didn't quite know that she was in Stuttgart for that period when you were there. But so again, you gradually, over a period of 10 years, did all of these roles in Stuttgart. But my point is that they are what Martina calls big girl roles. In other words, dramatic, powerful, passionate, terrific. We love those roles, no complaint. Fricka is a big girl role, Erda certainly.
Yeah.
But that was kind of a big leap vocally for a young artist. And I guess what I'm saying is, obviously you had it early. Yeah, that you didn't have to do the Mozart progression to lead up to those roles. You were there.
No. Well, I did the Mozart, and well, the thing that was, I find, in my opinion, different for me as a young artist, as opposed to, you know, I've had the great opportunity and grace to work with some young artists in the last years, let's say last 4 or 5 years. I've done it quite often, and the difference is, in my beginning years, I only sang leader. You know, it was many years. I think in my maybe sophomore or going to junior year, I got my first, what I understood to be operatic aria. You know, so first of all, to say that, and second of all, so when I started singing these quote unquote big girl roles, I was always told that I had the voice for that. You know, I was actually told by one of my early agents that, you know, you're basically a born Amneris, you know, which I thank him to this day for, because you know, it stands me in good stead. You know, even now, after more than, you know, I recently, the production that I recently did in Cincinnati, I reunited with Gordon Hawkins, who was my very first Amanazro in my very first Aida ever, which we came to the conclusion was 1992. You know? Wow. I'm grateful to that agent to this day, you know, Brzezinski, may he rest in peace, who told me that and made me to understand that obviously there is a path, though, you know, being a born something and growing into it is not the same thing. And I know that what I feel, to be honest, about the opera world is that I'm more fortunate than ever, because I not only had the opportunity to be told that early and to get to try it out early, but in the course of the career, I had the, as you say, I did the big girl roles for a while, and then there were other things, you know, that came along that were maybe just as interesting, but not those that allowed me to develop other sides of the artistic, of the instrumental gifts. And so then, you know, having like now revisiting, for example, a role like Amneris, which I want to say until this recent Cincinnati performances, I was measuring it. I think the last one was maybe about 2012, so 10 years. But, you know, they say, train up a child in the way it shall go, and it will not depart from it. And I feel like the voice and the roles that you put into it are a little bit like that, you know. People who, you know, learned to ride a bicycle early, but didn't do it for the last 10 years. With a few days, a few weeks, a few, you know, get their confidence. Basically, it is the confidence, isn't it? You know, you get your confidence together, get the wheels going, and you can ride the bike again. So I'm grateful.
Confidence, but also technique.
Yeah.
So clearly early on in your education, and probably ever since, technique has to have been a foundation for you, because not just because not everyone can sing Azucena and Frick and so on, but because they can't sing them forever. And you continue to sing them magnificently, which is not a given for many artists. And I see that the screen is frozen, and I'm wondering if you hear what I'm saying. Perhaps
I'm
not.
Frozen.
I will keep talking. Frozen. We have some connectivity issues at the moment. And I don't know if Tichina, she can't shake her head because it's frozen. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
You heard everything. Okay. So anyway, it's about technique, and technique can take us so far. Nature, nurture takes us further, but you know, not everyone who sings Amneris at 30 can sing her at 50, and a lot of people who start Amneris at 30 cannot sing her at all at 40. And but this is what I meant about my image of the stone in the lake, that it continues to expand in a wonderful way, in a great way.
Yeah.
That you are able to achieve that. And I'm just going to comment further, and then you can take it from me, that you were in Stuttgart as a principal artist from 1996 to 2006. And then from 2010 to 2018, you were a principal artist at the Semper Opera in Dresden. And you and I had lunch one year, a few years ago there.
Yes.
And did all kinds of expanding roles there that you didn't do before, like Prince Orlovsky in Die Fledermaus, which is a comedic role requiring excellent German, which you have. Cornelia and Giulio Cesare, which is an entirely other kind of voice, and that's from Handel, than would be Clytemnestra or Eboli, which you also did there. And you did Isabella in Italiana and Algeri, which you at your Met finals sang that aria, Cruda Sorte, and I was there, so I remember. So doing at the Met in 1989, and then 20 years later, not everyone can sing Isabella in Rossini when she's done all the big girl roles. It doesn't necessarily come back, but for you, it has very beautifully. Is there an explanation for that?
Good question, Fred. Very good question. I call it grace, if I'm honest. You know, I don't have a particular.
I call it Shirley.
Yeah, but I will say that I do believe that here's the thing. I always had a different concept of this thing that was being an operatic artist and what a career meant than what we now have. That's become clear to me, because as you say, I was out of the country basically for many years, a couple of decades. And then suddenly had the opportunity, thank God, to, return to the Met, and not only as an artist, but also to visit and see what there, and it was just a totally different world. I mean, I'm not saying good or bad or whatever. It was just, I, as we spoke about before, and yourself as well, had the great good fortune to grow up and be a child and have the sound and the concept of being an operatic artist implanted in me in a different way than what we now experience. I was always, I guess, if you say, what is the thing? I never had the ideal that I was in a short haul, quick fix, you know, get to the high point, quick situation. My understanding of what I saw at the Met, when I came in my early 20s as a young artist, and the things that, Morella Freni, Shirley Verret, Pavarotti, all the people that I encountered in the hallways of the Met as young artists who made the foundation of what I thought I should seek to be, told me back then, you're just going to take some time.
Yeah.
You're not going to be ready for a while, just because you had the great grace to win this competition, end up in this amazing place, doesn't mean that you have everything you need to survive and stay here. There's a lot that you have to learn. And I was never in a hurry, to be honest.
Morella Freni was known as La Prudentissima, the most prudent one. And she would always say that the most important word for an opera singer is no. Mr. Von wanted her to sing Madame Butterfly. No.
Yeah, and I don't know that I had all of that. As I can say, I didn't start out with any plan, any map. If you had asked me, are you going to move to Germany and live there for a couple of decades and whatever, I came here with a 3-year contract, and my plan was to come here for 3 years, learn some stuff about what it was I was trying to do, and get back home, and make it work. So at some point, though, I realized that there was so much I didn't know, and so much that I needed to learn, and that I had been placed in, you might say, a very privileged situation to be able to learn that in a certain way, outside of the big screen as we have it now. Stuttgart was on the map. It was always being, reviewed or whatever, but it wasn't being at the Met. It wasn't being in a place where the scrutiny was as strong. And then I met a lot of artists when I came here who were also in that place. They were not necessarily young artists. They were not old artists. They were developing, and they were being given the opportunities to do that, so much anymore in the FEST system like it used to. I know that there are still these opportunities, and I always encourage young artists, if you get an opportunity to spend a couple of years, couple of seasons doing things, working in Europe, I highly encourage it. It can be very life-changing. It doesn't have to be like me for a lifetime. I have several colleagues who came for 2 or 3, 4 or 5 seasons, and then they went back, but they went back with, 10 performances of Senta, and which Cincinnati, for example, was amazing, a wonderful company, but the most they could offer was 4 performances of Aida. And which was great, don't get me wrong, but it's not the same. So I do encourage that. But yeah.
Listeners should know that I had Evans Mirages, the artistic director in Cincinnati, on about 2 years ago in June. And this past June, I had Chris Milligan, who's the head of the company. They're
Amazing.
wonderful people, and that makes
Wonderful.
Cincinnati Opera great. So if they want to know a lot about Cincinnati Opera, they should visit my conversations with Evans Mirages and Christopher Milligan. I have known other Americans and Canadians, and to a lesser extent, Asians, who have moved to Europe to do what is called FEST. In other words, a permanent contract with a company, an attachment to a company. And they've stayed and
Yeah.
they've built their lives in Germany specifically. And they have had children who were born in Germany, not necessarily of German fathers or mothers, but from elsewhere, but have benefited from the German social system in terms of welfare and healthcare and quality of life issues that unfortunately Americans cannot expect, although I think we should, but we don't for the moment. And Obamacare is a good step forward, but it's just a step. Germany has been doing it for 100 years. And so you are an artist who made the center of her life Europe, although you are an American. And before we talk about the most recent years of your career, where you've become very, very, very international, talk about being an American, a Black woman in this case, resident in Germany for more than 20 years.
Well, I would have to say it's very interesting. I feel myself in a very privileged situation because not only have I been in Germany, more than a couple of decades, I have had the great honor and privilege of living in both Germanys, as it were. In the sense that when I came, Germany has only been a unified nation for the last 30 somewhat years. And so when I came more than 20 years ago, it was still very new, this one Germany concept. And I had, the good fortune of landing in the West, which was very, in this sense, used to foreigners, very foreigner friendly, very open, and there was a nickname for Americans that came to the West in those days, the Amis, and people. I mean, some of the Schwäbisch or the area that I landed in, you would become like my Amis. They would go, oh, my Amis are whatever. And then about 10 years later,
which is not Miami.
No. Ami is short for American.
I know.
Which is Americana in German. In every case, so those are wonderful. And it was, because there were also very many Americans there. For example, when we first moved there, I think my son, which is one of the things that attracted me to moving, he was getting ready for first grade, not quite, maybe last years of kindergarten or so. And we came for the summer to start the rehearsals for the Falstaff, and I brought him with me. And we were able at that time, this is when a peaceful time, I suppose, because there were 3 US military installations there in Stuttgart. And on one of them, there was a little league baseball team that we were able to sign up for, join, and every Thursday or Wednesday, whatever it was, I took my little boy up to practice with other Americans, it was already quite an inviting situation. And then when I started working in the theater, I did the Falstaff, as I said. And 2 women who are still very influential and loved and my dearest friends in the world, Catriona and Helene Schneiderman, were the Nanetta and the Meg in this Falstaff. And Catriona is Scottish and Helene is American, but married to a German, and and they're a transplanted German in that way. But long story short, they were both mothers of young children, very well respected in the work that they did. I went to the bank one day, and there was a huge banner of Helene as Giulio Cesare or whatever. And but they were able to do this job, tuck their kids in every night, be mothers, in the fashion that you can, but be at home, but yet crafting their careers. And that was really interesting. And the more that I got to know, the more I decided, I thought it could, but to be honest with you, when it was first offered to me, I was like, no, because the roles were, like you say, I'd already done Amneris, and I'd already done Eboli. And the problem was that when I came, I guess it was an unexpected time. So there were no like Ebolis or whatever to offer. It was like third lady. And I had been third
Magic
lady
flute, yeah.
at Wolf Trap,
Yeah.
and I was like, what? I'm not going to move my family, all over the thing. Although she clearly said, this first season, it will be this and this and that. But the second season, there might be an Eboli. We want to see how you do in Wagner or whatever. And it was interesting. And I said, no, I don't want to wait. Third lady, no. And I don't think my family. I had the best agent in the world at that moment, which not everybody would agree with, and I won't say, who, when they got the call, called me and said, are you serious? They told me they offered you this thing. And I said, yeah, but people told me, because I don't know if you remember, there was a certain time when they said, if you go fest, they'll ruin your voice. Don't accept the fest. You'll sing everything every night and it'll ruin your voice. And so these are the things that I had in my head as a young artist at the time. And so I said, no, I don't think so. And this agent called me and they said, are you crazy? They're going to call you back next week to the office and you're going to have another conversation. And I advise you, I think it would be the best thing for you. And of course, I was like I wasn't yet 25. I had to be 26. Yeah, in my early 20s. So I was like, really? Is that what I should do? Okay, I'll do it. But and so I can only say thank God for the advisors and the people that I had along the way. But yeah, that's my story. So then it was Stuttgart for all those years. It started with a 3-year contract, which kept being verlängert, extended,
yeah,
every time it got close. And then there was an Intendantenwechsel, the general manager went into retirement. And so basically everybody was pretty much cast out. But at the time it was okay because I had already not only had that career in Stuttgart, I had taken an international agent. So I was very active in Italy, in Greece, in Hungary, and, in all of Europe. And that went pretty well. But what happened was in 2008, there was a very big crisis in Italy with the finance, and everything fell flat. And so all the work dried up and everything. But fortunately, Dresden at the time was on the verge of something quite international, which I think it was new for them to have like an international ensemble. And one of the agents that I was working with here in Germany got the call that they were looking for, an international experienced ensemble. And at the time, Fabio Luisi was the general music director. And so we came and did the auditions in 2009. And then, but unfortunately, by the time we got here, Fabio Luisi had gone because there was some controversy about the position. But
it's very interesting what you brought up, and I hadn't thought of it, that in effect, you lived in Western Germany and Eastern Germany, even though technically Dresden had moved to the West. Even now, when I go to Dresden, it doesn't quite feel like Western Germany.
No, Dresden.
And I first worked in Germany, let me get this right, in Munich when I was a 19-year-old, don't get me started, at the Bavarian State Opera in 1976. And Munich, I know, Munich, Nadine Sierra, Danielle Denise, and me, teenagers at the opera.
I love it.
But then I worked in Berlin when I was about 21. And at that time, Berlin was completely West Berlin and East Berlin. And West Berlin was surrounded by Eastern Germany. And I remember the wall, and I remember the political tensions and carrying my documents all the time. And now when you go to Berlin, you could feel how it's changing, and in Dresden too, but Dresden is a bit behind. And that's not a criticism, but it's just culturally oriented more toward what was Eastern Europe. I've worked in Leipzig, but not as much as Dresden, and it's a similar feeling in Leipzig.
Yeah. Well, I feel like from my understanding, I haven't spent a lot of time in Leipzig, but it is because of the university nature, the research nature, the more, as you can say, capacities for connections to other parts of the world. Not that Dresden does not have an amazing technical university where, you know, you find people from all corners of the world on faculty studying or whatever. Somehow Leipzig seems to be a more open culture, but Dresden is still very, very, you know, DDR, they call it, you know, Deutsche Democratic Republic, it was. Interesting enough, I was watching something recently about the difference between, because at that time, here in the East was the DDR, and where I used to live in Stuttgart was the BRD, you know, the Bundesrepublik Deutschland.
Bundesrepublik Deutschland, and Bonn was the capital, which was
and
not
Bonn
that far
was
away.
the capital,
Right.
So when it's interesting because now I've been here more than 10 years. We came here, my kids and I, in 2010. And I've seen the development of Dresden I almost want to say through very unique eyes, in the sense that I'm a foreigner who, what they say was eingedeutscht, you know, I was made German.
Germanized,
by the Schwäbisch people, who
by Swabians,
the Swabians of Baden-Württemberg. And then moved and finished raising my kids in Saxon with the Sächsische people, you know, so
have a
very unique look about the whole thing. And I really do feel that we're still, it is, in my opinion, as a modern citizen of the world, very clear that Dresden is still, in a certain way, a former communist country that is learning to be the modern, actually amazing. It's such an amazing city. That's the thing about it.
It is,
it's so beautiful and has so much to offer in every way. I mean, I think there are 5 symphonies here, you know. There's a jazz festival, there's a Dixieland festival, there's a, you know, an Elba with the Steamboat Festival, you know. Yeah, I live in there's the Neustadt and the new city and the old city. I've lived in both of them, you know. I mean, and I will say,
there's my favorite milk bar in the world happens to be on the other side of the river in Dresden.
Yeah, well, wait a minute, the Molkerei.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, don't knock a milk bar until you've tried it. It's pretty phenomenal.
It's true. And I live maybe 10 minutes walk from this milk bar. Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a bit about Dresden for listeners and Leipzig. Saxony, of course, was high German art and culture before the Nazi era, before Weimar, although it certainly was in all those years. And Leipzig was where Mendelssohn and Grieg and Schumann studied. Leipzig historically was one of the great publishing centers of Europe, and therefore very scholarly, and not just publishing of books, but also of music. And in the 19th century, many people went to Leipzig to study. But Dresden was always sort of the imperial capital city of Saxony. It's exceedingly beautiful. Wagner, by the way, was born in Leipzig, but grew up in Dresden. And so therefore you feel him in both towns. And Lohengrin was composed not too far from where you live. And I've been to that house. I guess you have too. I don't know if you know Michael Herschel, who's a conductor who lives in Dresden and heads the Jewish orchestra, but also is a very established Wagnerian and created that museum and the exhibition there. It's a remarkable place devoted to culture. It is a place that suffered terribly in World War II in terms of bombing and destruction. People know Kurt Vonnegut's book Slaughterhouse-Five. That takes place in Dresden, and I've been to that place where it actually happened. and yet it was rebuilt in the communist era to much of its former imperial beauty. The Opera House is one of the most gorgeous in the world. I would put it on my top 5 list. And it's one of the few opera houses anywhere named for an architect, Semper, rather than named for the city or the state or the imperial or whatever. It's named for the person who designed it. Sure. And Dresden also has this devotion to culture that I think when cities are destroyed, they grasp onto the culture more, whether it's culinary, whether it's musical, whether it's visual arts, amazing museums in Dresden. But just with the difference that parts of Italy that were destroyed, when they were rebuilt, they then went to democracy, let's say, from fascism. What happened in Dresden is it went from fascism to totalitarian communism, as opposed to a more enlightened communism, to then the West in 1991 and all of the adjustments that had to be made. So there was a cultural pause, not pause, because, for example, the Lohengrin production that I've seen for many years in Dresden is from the communist era. And it's a very traditional Lohengrin production, but people still visually have that as their Lohengrin. Dresden is also the place where 9 of Richard Strauss's operas premiered. No other city can claim that. He was from Munich. He worked a lot in Vienna, but it was Dresden that gave the premieres of Rosenkavalier and Elektra and many more. And so this legacy there that you walk around in and are part of and contribute to.
I know, right? I know.
Quite remarkable. I remember when we had lunch that we were walking down the street together near the Green Vault, which is a magnificent museum, and you look perfectly content in your setting, so to speak.
Well, I am, I mean, I consider it a high honor, to have sung, for example, Clytemnestra in the house where she was born.
Yeah.
And with the and believe me, the Sächsische Staatskapelle, which is the state orchestra of Saxony, takes it very seriously. When they play any Strauss, all the German repertoire really, but when they play Strauss or Wagner, it's a very serious thing. And when you're walking out the door and you've had a performance and orchestra members who you've been colleagues with for 5-6 years, who say hi, bye, whatever, but hardly ever stop you and say, "Mein Gott, das war so schön," for your Clytemnestra.
Wow.
I wear that with a huge badge of honor. Really.
I wonder whether that orchestra and the library of the Opera House have scores that date back 100 years. In New York, at the New York Philharmonic,
for sure,
they have scores that Mahler himself conducted and worked from.
For sure.
That Leonard Bernstein made his notes in and so forth.
Yeah.
The Dvorak used when he was in New York.
For sure. When you're at the source, it reminds me a little bit of another story, but I sang also, I guess one of the roles that I've done more than I've done, even the German stuff, is the Amneris in Verdi. And one of the years that I did it, so many performances in Verona, but one season, most of the performances that I did were the Zeffirelli modern production with the blue and the big pyramid in the middle. But there came a year when they wanted to redo the 1913 production, which is when it was opened with the 1913 with the famous Veronese tenor and everything. And it's all in white. And they brought back Giancarlo de Bossio. De Bossio was his name. And he had to be in his 60s, 70s. I mean, so he was like privy, one of those last remaining, survivors of whenever the 1913, maybe he was, the assistant stage, the note taker, the coffee guy, whatever it was. But he had like what everybody said. And he gave me on opening night a Xerox copy of and he explained to me that when Maestro Verdi wrote Aida and you requested a score from Ricordi, you got a certain pamphlet this thick with Verdi's staging
Wow.
notes. And he gifted me
Oh my goodness.
a Xerox copy of these things that record, nobody gets anymore, of these staging notes. So I felt like that, when I sang the Wagner or the Strauss here, and had such a positive response from it. Like, I mean, also, to be honest, the responsibility of it, and so at the end, when you get, positive critique from that, I'm very honored to
Do you know that Strauss, who was born in 1864, and Verdi, who was born in 1813, had a correspondence in the 1890s, I would guess. And Verdi, in effect, was the person who created the sense of that composers should get royalties for their works. And Strauss was inspired by that and created the equivalent in Germany and wrote to Verdi about that. But then also, and the letters are wonderful, wrote to Verdi about Falstaff and about the character of Falstaff and how he created it. And then, in effect, adapted some of Verdi's ideas, not stole, because Strauss was very open about the inspiration, in creating Baron Ochs into Rosenkavalier. It's not that Falstaff became Baron Ochs, but some of the spirit of Baron Ochs, the inebriation, the lightheartedness, the larger than life issues, the politically incorrect stuff, informed Baron Ochs, came right out of Verdi's Falstaff.
I can imagine. Interestingly enough, I was doing some interview when I was there in Cincinnati about it, and they asked, what is it, about this opera, this Verdi, Saida, what is it, and for me, a big part of my answer was that it's just so dramatically, masterfully done. And I say the same for all the Strauss things. I mean, you can't look away for a minute. Or you don't want to stop listening for a minute, because the drama, the text, and the music are so properly well married and put together that they just lead you, you could have the worst singers, and the worst staging, but the piece itself will always bring you where the composer intended, because it's so well put together.
And it helps that Verdi, late in his career, and Strauss for most of his career, had wonderful librettists.
True.
That didn't hurt. The early librettists in Verdi were not the best, but later on they were terrific. And Strauss almost always had great librettists. So I want to take our discussion back to New York and the Met, and then we'll go to Cincinnati. And then I want to ask you about a person I think you knew who I loved, but we're going to get to her at the end. You sang in La Traviata as a very young artist, as Anina, and your leads were Cheryl Studer as Violetta and Alfredo Kraus as Alfredo.
Right.
I mean,
right.
What did you know at the time, and what did you learn being in the presence of these two wonderful artists?
Listen, I was so opera ignorant when I arrived at the Met at that very young age, that everything made a great impression. But what I will say is that I was also, because I'd already been on stage a lot because of Performing Arts High School and various, things, freelance things in Atlanta, I was quite stage savvy. And so I could feel, whatever you call it, the genuine stage thing had happened, that magic, that X factor that we call it. I could feel when it happened and when it had not. And let me tell you, there wasn't one of those ladies that I had. And not only did I have Cheryl Studer, who, lay me down to sleep, but I also had Silviero.
Diana Silviero, wow.
Yeah. I also had Marilyn Mims.
Yes.
Wonderful
artist in Mississippi. I remember her debut. She's not remembered now as much as I wish she were.
It's true. It's true. As a young artist, just, I mean, they would go, I need, Yeah, and it would just be like, I say often, people don't understand. That's another of the magnitude of the sound and the quality of artistry that I was exposed to by just being on stage with Diana Soviero. You know, this I just felt it. It was something like, I hope I can do that one day, every
Mhm.
night,
And
basically.
Alfredo Kraus, I mean, it's no secret that Luciano Pavarotti and I were great friends, and there will never be another Luciano Pavarotti,
Yes.
and he's number one, but my number 1A is Alfredo
It's true,
Kraus.
it's true. And
And
we had the great honor.
loved Alfredo Kraus.
He
Yes.
actually gave us master classes.
Uh-huh.
So he was such a lovely, elegant, um, I don't know, very, I could, like a high gentleman type of
Yes.
personality for me as young artists. And he actually twice, we as young artists at the Met were given master classes with Alfredo Kraus. And I want to say I may have sang for him my Mozart, because it was a situation, or else the Rossini, because I won the Met with Rossini. That was my whole Marilyn Horne connection, was that that was one of my competition hours early, and she was judging the National Society of Arts and Letters, like even before I graduated bachelor's, and I had done it for her. But anyway, yeah, and he was just the most elegant, lovely masterclass that I
remember any particular thing you might have learned from him, either about style or about breathing or technique?
Well, I would say that, at the time, it's something that, it's interesting, because I feel like if you ever start trying to tell people what you learned, or you hear something that was a huge issue for you, and you've learned to master, it comes to you really quickly when you hear it again. So one of the things that I learned, and I remember him being very clear about, is something that I also find that recently I did some master classes where it was something to the extent, it's not verbatim, you won't quote it, but it's something to the extent of, because it's opera, doesn't mean you have to sing it loud. That the process of the technical learning is that you sing it with ease and elegance, and not necessarily with force and loud. And whatever I was working with him, I remember I was actually, maybe it was My Man's Gone. It was like, and he was like, you have the voice, you don't need it, you have the voice. I won't forget it because
no one like him. No one. He did not necessarily have the most beautiful voice ever, but what a singer. And what an actor.
I didn't recognize that. Yeah, because he was very good. I liked him because he was very kind to us as young artists, and that was very important. Yeah.
People ask me constantly, who's your favorite of the three tenors, Luciano Pavarotti, Placido Domingo, Jose Carreras? I always say Alfredo Kraus. It's just easier. And I said that to Luciano. He said, you're right.
Although I will say Luciano was my favorite.
Oh, I know, but
I mean, I also, don't get me wrong, I love Domingo, and I never had much interaction with Carreras, but I interacted with Pavarotti as a young artist and Domingo as a young artist. And obviously later in my career, I was conducted by Domingo, and I sang in LA where, he was running the company, and when we did the Tritico. So I have a lot of, and I
was Frugula, right? In Tritico?
Frugula, exactly. But
Carreras is actually the first one I worked with.
Oh, okay.
When I was at La Scala before I came to the Met, and I was part of the production team of Simone Boccanegra, and he sang Gabriele Adorno with Morella Freni, Piero Cappuccilli, Ruggero Raimondi, Claudio Botto conducting, and Giorgio Strehler staging. I mean, it was that, and then the next night was Shirley Verret and Leonucci, or Piero Cappuccilli in Macbeth. So,
oh my gosh, to die for. Your life. No wonder. Yeah.
Well, I'm very grateful, to put it mildly. Another question I want to ask you about in my preparation, you might be the only person or one of very few persons who sang in the first Met production of Porgy and Bess from 1985-86, and the second production of Porgy and Bess. You were Lily in the first one, and you sang Lily, and you sang Mariah in the second one. And I was very involved in the production of the first one, and Nat Merrill was director, and James Levine conducted, and Grace Bumbry and Simon Estes and Greg Baker was the phenomenal crown, and the whole cast was incredible. Could you talk about, I don't want to say one was better, one was worse, because that's not the point, but the experience of being in the first production of Porgy and Bess, which had a very different visual style and dramatic style. And I will say, I think it's fair to say, Levine conducted it differently from David Robertson, who did the second. They had different emphases. The way they knit together the stories. Also, the score was slightly changed in the second from the first. But do you remember, as a very young artist, being in the first Met Porgy and Bess production, and then the experience of this massive hit that was the second production?
Of course, of course. Well, I actually came in the second iteration of the first production. So they started it, I think, in 85 or whatever, but I came in when they brought it back the second time in 89. And actually, I thought I debuted in 89, but the posters say it was 90 by the time I actually, so it was 89, 90 season. But I have to say,
yeah, I looked it up. The Med said 1990 for you.
90, yeah,
89 for National Council.
Yeah, I joined the program in 89, and it turned to 90. But in every case, one of the things that I was probably recently speaking to someone about this, how grateful I was, because the thing is, I was not opera literate, as I think. Perhaps, let's say, not enough as one perhaps should be when one gets engaged at the biggest opera company in the world. I was vocal literate, and like I said, my most of my early educational opportunities had been leader until about sophomore year or so. We started with Haydn, and then I got the Così, and then I think by the time I left undergrad, I had done Dorabella, Dido, and Arnalta in Popea. That was all the opera that I knew. And so, but I was singing the arias, because different, I sang Dido, Dalila, all of the things from the old, not even the modern mezzo, but you remember the old one, the Schirmer old mezzo with all the, hits in it. So of course I had an audition list from there. And one of those was My Man's Gone Now. And so when I did the Met audition, and I did it with My Man's Gone Now and Cruda Sorte, it just so happened, I guess, that the talent was great enough or whatever, that I was, and I was brought in as Lily. And when I looked,
just for people to know, My Man's Gone Now is Serena Robbins' great aria that laments the death of her husband, and it's a showstopper. And Serena has been sung by mezzos and by sopranos.
It's true. It's true. Interestingly enough, I just did this concert in Boston with the conductor, Christopher Wilkins, who I had worked with. I worked with him 30 years ago, before we figured out, before I had a child, which my oldest son will be 30 in January. And not since then. And funny enough, when I said I was going to do Porgy next, he said, "Oh, you're still doing Serena," because he's one of the few people in the world now who remember me as a Serena. Because for those early years, I did do a Serena. I did do mostly Serenas. But anyway, no. So when I sang this and I came into the Met in the Porgy, I got cast, and into the programming, I got cast. It was probably the best thing that could have happened for me, because here were, like I said, for example, in Cincinnati, I recently met Gordon Hawkins again, who was also in that production as Jake, and a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, a little bit, and so here I was met with this great group of artists who looked like me, who understood me from a certain place that perhaps had I, ended up coming in Rigoletto or coming in, I wouldn't have been embraced in the same type of way. And sort of because, for example, Camellia Johnson, who was the Serena at the time, because it ended up that I was cast as Lily, and as they did it back then, the third Serena cover. It was like,
Yep.
You can learn it, look at it, but trust us, if it comes down to it, you'll never come near it, which was fine, as young as I was. I that was like already a big honor, to be the third.
Can I say something about Camellia Johnson, who I adored? She used to like to hang out in my office in the theater. She'd come and visit with me. And do you know that for a period, she drove a taxi to make ends meet? And one time drove me home in her taxi.
I love it. But that's, and it's so good that you say that, because that's the type of women, that's what I'm saying. This was the model that I had.
Yeah.
And do you know that once I got there and she had done those Serenas, she started to ascend. And do you know what she did when she started to ascend? All those Beethoven nines and Messiahs at those churches in Brooklyn and the Congregational Center and whatever, she called me. And it was so funny, because I don't know how we even, I was her cover, but I was this young girl and I was stupid and taking stupid chances and risks. And she would call me with her deep speaking voice.
Yes.
And go, look, I heard you're to this. I want you to be in Brooklyn at this church on Saturday at blah, blah, blah. And they're going to pay you $500. And you know what I would say? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I'll drive you.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be there. That was it. And so in this way, coming in, in the program, and not to mention, getting to be conducted by James Levine, my first thing out the bat, and, somebody like Greg Baker on the stage. Listen, here's a story people don't know. I'll never forget. In the What You Want with Bess scene. I don't know if you remember that production. There was this.
I worked on that production. I know.
You remember that production?
Yeah.
There was this huge log, which I found quite phallic to be, but anyway, huge log, catty-corner, diagonal across the stage, and they straddled it.
Yeah.
While Crown grabbed, whatever he did with Bess from behind. And so it was the night actually that Terry Cook, it wasn't Greg Baker, Greg Baker was singing. Greg Baker was singing. And we were young, we were young, impressionable. It was Greg Baker. He was on stage. He had
Greg
sweat.
Baker is still, but was a phenomenally handsome, athletic man.
Yeah. Hi, Greg, if you're watching, we still love you,
We do.
But I mean, really, it was, a 20-something-year-old just into the opera business. What? This thing. and so one of my other younger, colleagues and I, we used to always watch this scene from the wings, and we'd be like, oh my God, he's so cute, whatever. And one night we're watching the scene and I look over my shoulder, and do you know who's watching and fanning themselves? Kathy Battle.
Yep.
It was so hilarious. And we were both like
I remember the wings got very crowded when Greg Baker was on the stage.
And so me and my colleague, these young girls were going, and then we look over and we go, oh, excuse me, ma'am, excuse me. And she's like, it's
but also Grace Bunbury, he would have to lift her up and come on, Bess, and she would protest, but only slightly as he swept her up into his arms. And in the first year of the production, the alternate crown was a wonderful gentleman named Arthur Thompson, who was a wonderful singer, an older man.
Yeah.
But he didn't have that kind of ability to sweep up Grace Bunbury.
Right.
And Arthur was gay, and this is no secret. He said, I'm not so much a crown as a tiara.
I love it. That's so perfect. That's so perfect. So perfect. So perfect. You have started something. I'm never going to forget that.
I know. So, but the thing is, the second production is visually more streamlined. I would say socially more conscious of evolution of racial equality, and we still have a long way to go. But mindful of things that the 1980s production, I'm not saying that they were Jazzbo, which was one of the characters named Jazzbo Brown. They were socially alert, and it was wonderful to have a production with almost all Black artists in the 80s at the Met. But this new production factors in social issues of our time without putting them on the stage, but you're just aware of them because of what is happening in the real world. And there was a wonderful dynamic young cast. The choreography in the second one was very different from the first, a lot more choreographed. The first one was more, I would say, spontaneous rather than professional choreography. The chorus was incredibly dynamic, as was the first one. But again, very different. So I loved both, but they were, to me, very different experiences.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you're the only person who was in both productions. You might have been.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I actually spoke that around the Met, that I'm really thinking that there are a few people who were in there before, and they're the last time. Yeah. I'm not sure. I didn't research it or whatever, but as far as I know, that is the case. Yeah.
So now we're going to go to Cincinnati and the most recent concert, not the Aida, about which I wish I could have attended, and I hope it was recorded, although I've seen lots of snippets of videos from the wings. That was pretty phenomenal. And then we're going to conclude by talking about a particular person that I think you know and I knew and loved. So talk about Morris Robinson, who I want to be a guest on this show, but he's a busy man.
He's a busy guy.
And the night that he arranged in Cincinnati.
Well, the most interesting thing about Morris Robinson and I guess, is that I feel like we were already on some cosmic path long before either of us knew of either of us. And the clincher for this statement is that, Morris is from Atlanta. And if I'm not mistaken, and he will correct me if I'm wrong.
He definitely will.
We figured out there in Cincinnati that when I graduated the Northside High School for Performing Arts in that summer, in that fall, Morris Robinson started the same high school. And not only that, but when we were riding to this rehearsal in Cincinnati, we started talking about it. And there's a funny, interesting, what I call God incidents, where I graduated that school one year. And as I said, I don't know if I said so. Anyway, there was a touring company. That was the thing. The elite group of performers for that high school was called the Touring Company. And we went to Maui. We went to, Coca-Cola sponsored the school. We did their conventions and stuff like that, performances for the conventions. And the year I graduated, the big trip was Maui. The next year, the trip was going to be Brussels. And what happened was, whatever they had planned for this Brussels trip, somebody fell out. And suddenly, after my first year at Georgia State, which I did not enjoy, to be honest, because I couldn't read music, I didn't know theory. This lady was talking to me about what I then said, Baharam, which was Brahms. But, I was like, I don't even know, whatever. And so I get this phone call that says, hey, the Northside School of the Arts is going to go to Brussels, and their person who sings this particular part, which you used to sing, is falling out. What about it? So there was going to be this tryout performance at some local high school. They said, okay, be here on this day, and blah, blah. And I show up, and it's funny. I had a conversation with a friend of mine tonight, because he told me that this happened to him. And he was asking me, had it ever happened to you? And I said, the only time my voice ever went out on me mid-performance ever in my life was way back right after high school, when I thought I was going to leave studying opera and go be Jennifer Holliday, not even Jennifer Hudson. Before it was Jennifer Holliday who did that. And I am telling you,
in Dreamgirls.
And Yeah. So, and that was the piece, right? And I thought, oh my God, I can finally get rid of this opera stuff, which I don't understand, and go back to something I know. I did the performance midway through the song, really, never again in all these years. All of a sudden, things just weren't working. No, sound wasn't coming out, whatever. And of course, at the end, the teacher, the administrator said, well, maybe you're not the one. But here's the kicker. Guess who was playing drums? Who was in that show?
Drums was Morris.
Morris.
Yeah, yeah.
We figured that out in the taxi on the way to rehearsal for this concert in Cincinnati. Is that not crazy?
Talk about the concert, but first I have to interject something. Dreamgirls, Jennifer Holliday, and I'm telling you, I'm not going. The role was initially written for a friend of mine who they built it on her voice, but then she turned it down she had a Tony Award to go to Hollywood and do a TV series named Nell Carter, who was a good friend of mine.
Of course,
and
I know Nell Carter.
Nell loved opera. And I used to take her to the opera all the time. And Nell had serious aspirations of being an opera singer. And she was a fantastic singer.
I never knew that.
Not an opera singer.
I know because I imitated her because I did the Fats Waller.
A Misbehaving.
And I was the Nell Carter role.
But I took her one night to Aida, and it was Grace Bunbury singing Amneris. And Nell turned to me after and she said, I'm going to sing Amneris. I said, you're going to sing Despina.
Can you
I love you, that? Know you are not an Amneris.
But as Despina, what she would have done
She would have been the perfect Despina. That's the point. Because she could have done it vocally. Vocally, she had that, and she would have been fantastic.
It would have been awesome. Look at that. I often say Sarah Vaughan also would have been an amazing contralto.
Yeah, true. But anyway, the concert in Cincinnati that Morris Robinson organized. Talk about that.
Listen, it was one. I hope that it can be replicated somewhere because, to my knowledge, it is the only ever of its kind, and Morris's which he talked about when we arrived at this rehearsal that I was describing earlier, and he had a moment to speak with the choir that introduced himself and introduce all of us. He spoke to them, and one of the things that he said, which really struck me, was that one of the reasons he wanted to put this thing together was that as a child of a pastor, and someone like myself who I grew up in a missionary Baptist church. I'm not sure if his is missionary Baptist or Kojic, but in every case, we all grew up in the quote unquote Black church, and have been very graced and very fortunate to make these international operatic careers. However, there's a school that wants to say, yeah, that's because they're different. And what Morris's contention was, no, it's not because we're different. It's because we, had this opportunity. We worked this way. We were exposed to this or exposed to that. So I understand, intention is to expose, one side to the other and vice versa, so that the classical music world gets a chance to experience what we grew up with, this whole spirit that we call the spirit of truth. And that the gospel music world and the church world gets to experience the classical music world, because who knows that in that choir is the next Morris Robinson or the next Lawrence Brownlee or the next Russell Thomas. So that was really something wonderful, and true to my heart to be a part of, because I've always felt that way as well, that it's just simply about the choices, like you said. Had Sarah Vaughan, had Nell Carter made other choices, who knows? But that we would have had some, great classical artists there. So that was one thing about the concert that was very important and very, satisfying to be a part of.
But it was a gospel concert primarily, not an opera or classical concert.
No. The whole first half was only opera.
Okay, I didn't know. Okay, because I only saw the gospel part.
I sang Amour vient aider. There was Pagliacci. I sang Bella Nuit with Jacqueline. Jacqueline Eccles did an amazing Sempre Libera. You know, we had
kind of phenomenal.
Yes, really phenomenal. Russell, did Vesti la Juba. And Will, I mean, everybody, the first half was complete straight orchestra. And then came the intermission, and the choir marched on, and the band, and then it was straight, because that was, I think, the point of it, when I understand it correctly, that it's not like you have to forsake one really for the other. You can do praise and worship, because, for example, Morris, in the end, so all of us had at least one classical solo and at least one gospel solo. And Morris did one of the most famous gospel pieces, but with his whole classical self, and in the most moving way, which I thought, perfect. This is what we want to say. You don't necessarily have to choose this or choose that. You can have both in your life, which, was for me,
You may not know about me that there are very few white guys who know more about gospel than I do.
Okay.
And many years ago, I did a public conversation with Lawrence Brownlee, and I could see his jaw drop, because it's not that I knew the top 5 hits, but I could talk about gospel groups and touring groups and Dorothy Norville and her style.
Wow.
Albertina Hunter, who's one of my very favorites.
Well, Shirley Caesar is in my hometown.
Oh, I know Pastor Shirley Caesar. You and I could do 2 hours just on Pastor Shirley, and I could do all of her monologues.
Life-changing.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, I want to conclude, because unfortunately I do have to conclude. There was a woman who was very dear to me, who I worked with when she came to the Met on the first production of Porgy and Bess in 1985. And we just kind of fell in love with each other. I don't mean romantically, but we just had a strong understanding of each other. And she did Mariah, and her name was Barbara Conrad. And did you know Barbara? Barbara Conrad is such a magnificent individual, and I'm hard pressed to find people who knew Barbara. She was from Texas. She was the first great Black star at the University of Texas for opera, and she was cast in a role, I think, Dido in Dido and the Diaz. And there was, racists who were saying that she couldn't sing with a white guy, and she left the production. And Harry Belafonte took up her cause and went national with it, and Eleanor Roosevelt paid for her tuition. And that was all of her early life. But Barbara didn't live on that story, so to speak. No. Barbara was in the present. And she never told me the story. I met Harry Belafonte, and he told me the story. He said, "You work in opera? Do you know Barbara Conrad?" And yeah, of course I know Barbara Conrad. And he told me the story. She never, ever did. And I didn't know all that as part of her past until I went and researched it. Was the most positive, wonderful, amusing, very funny person, very kind, such a wonderful artist, a benevolent artist to younger people.
Yeah.
Yesterday would have been her birthday. I always think of her on August 11th was her birthday.
Oh, I didn't
and I always used to celebrate her birthday. And she unfortunately late in her life had Alzheimer's and was gone from the scene. But for that reason, in part, and because of the particular trajectory of her life, people don't honor Barbara Conrad. I mean, Harry Belafonte is still with us. I don't know him personally. I don't know if he's ever written about that whole story. But did you know Barbara?
Of course. I'm so honored that you brought this up, because I owe Barbara Conrad a huge debt. So I was introduced to the concept of Barbara Conrad. I want to say my son was about 2, and I was doing my second or third Omneris in Detroit. And the makeup artist artist brought out the picture of what I was going to look like when he had done it. And it was this woman, this like picture of beauty, which I thought, how you gonna make me look like that? And in the end, I found out later, it was Barbara Conrad. She was amazing. But what happened was subsequently, I had moved to Germany. And as it is, which people don't talk about a lot, which I think will help a lot of young people if we do, is that as you move through the stages of life, so does your voice, your technique, and your concept of how you do what you do. And I had started out, as we said, early as an amneris. And there came, after childbirth, after, whatever, it started in the 20s into the mid 30s, there were things weren't, as easy, as clear, as functional as they were. And fortunately, the agent that I was working with at the time, I thought, okay, it's done. I don't know how to make this work. Things are, the Eboli aria doesn't pop out like it wants. I don't know what to do. They had the idea. I know who to get you to. And they sent me to Barbara Conrad. And Barbara took me into her New York apartment. I would sleep on her sofa. We would go to the 72nd Street address and work in the pool. We would ride the bike and open up our backs. And, and then subsequently, at some point I left New York and I moved back to North Carolina with my family, with my husband, and at that time, my son. And she had a boyfriend in Charlotte. And whenever she would come to Charlotte, I would go and have lessons with Barbara there in Charlotte to fix, what I call the gap years, which, like I say, people don't talk about as much as they should. That, as you age and as your body changes, just like things weren't the same from toddler to, adolescent to teenager to young adult, going further, also things change and you might need to make some adjustments. You need somebody who knows. Well, because she was an experienced mezzo-soprano, an amazing amneris, I credit her with actually, in a certain way, saving me from quitting. Because
did she ever talk about the adversity of the years in Texas and all that? I would love to know, if you want to share it, her feelings about that, because she was so vilified and it was just the most awful racism.
I called her a big, proud, long, tall Texas drink of water. Because she was so proud of that. And she told me the story of Halle Belafonte and showed me the clippings and the things. And do you know that eventually the state of Texas called her to the house and honored her on the floor of the Texas State House for her contributions to that. But it was frightening. What she told me is that, she was threatened.
She was 20 years old. She was a young woman.
Threatened.
And the music department, good for them for casting her.
Yeah.
And, casting a white guy if he was the best tenor, and that was that, and that should be enough. But, we still address these issues now, but imagine 1957 in the South.
No, scared out of her mind.
Yeah.
Frightened about the whole thing, but strengthened by the professor that taught her and that gave her the role. And then by the climate of change that she was in, but it's not a small thing. People should not think like, oh, that girl, she had this role and Harry Belafonte came and fought for her. No, it was a very scary, and I think if I'm not mistaken, there was the story of like things being thrown through her windows and threatening messages, and it was all of that.
Threats,
it was all of that, but she persevered.
And that's why it struck me that in my period, knowing her and working with her in the 80s and a little later, that she was sanguine, she was warm, she was generous, she was benevolent. She was so kind to any young artist who came along. She was a lovely colleague. She was very funny,
Wonderful.
very, very funny. And so I just didn't know. And she never wore that as part of the story. I guess she wanted to get past it.
Yeah. Well, she did tell me, she was one of the reasons that I came and stayed, because she told me that one of the things that she wished she had done was that when she had the opportunity to go to Europe, that she had taken it. And that if I got it, I should, which was few and far between, as we spoke about earlier. It used to be that people, a lot of people in those years are preaching a festival will ruin your voice. You'll be singing 5 different things every night and whatever. And she was one of the few people who said, I wish I had taken the opportunity, because I probably could have developed in a different way.
Yeah. Well, Tichina Vaughn, I'm glad that we were able to honor Barbara Conrad in a special way, but I'm also very glad that I was able to honor you, because I've thought so much of you for so long. Let's not pretend.
I'm so glad, it just goes to show you, things go the way they should go, because we ran into each other there at the Met, and with your
I planned to invite you anyway, but yeah, I was
yeah.
with my beautiful mother, yes, but I had planned to invite you anyway. You were already written on my list.
Yeah.
But when I saw you, I just took the opportunity to not wait to write to you, but just ask you directly. And I'm glad that we're able to set up today. This was a few months ago that I saw you, but today worked. And because you've been busy and I've been busy. But keep up the wonderful work. And I'll just add the fact that your career, The Stone in the Water, continues to expand internationally. And you are appearing a lot more in North America than you did. I know you're coming to Utah and Fort Worth and places like that, and Europe, and perhaps Asia. I don't know, but people around the world look for Tichina Vaughn on the schedule of your arts company, and I can guarantee it's a good night at the opera.
Yay! Thank you so much. It's been such a. Let me tell you,
Thank you, my dear.
that I was so honored to be able to have this time with you, because I said to my auntie, he's spoken to everybody.
Almost.
Every opera body. Every opera body.
Well, there are still a few that I have not gotten. I mean, not only at Fred Plotkin on Fridays, but in my course at NYU, and I've interviewed many people in public settings. I'm honored to say that very long ago, like 1986, Leontine Price agreed to sit with me in front of an audience, something that she seldom did. And she and I did several other conversations privately, and that was enriching in ways I can't even begin to explain.
Yeah.
But many, Joan Sutherland, many artists, either to work with or to speak with. But, there are new artists today that I want to talk to, a very fine younger generation, and a few of the oldies. And you're not an oldie, you're a midi. But I mean, the oldies that I'd like to get to. And if I can, I certainly will. But thank you.
I'll be looking forward to it. I've enjoyed it so much.
And you be well, and I look forward to hearing you in a theater close to me. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you, Fred. Good night.
Okay.